I'm 20 years old and about to graduate. Instead of inviting my parents to the ceremony, I chose to invite my uncle and aunt. They've been the ones supporting me throughout college after my parents made it clear they wouldn't be able to. Back in high school, my parents told me they were saving for retirement and wouldn't be able to help with my college expenses. They expected me to handle it myself since I was turning 18 and becoming an adult. I accepted it, knowing they'd always been tight with money when it came to me. I didn't want to beg them for help. Anticipating this, I spoke to my uncle, and he immediately agreed to cover my expenses until I graduated. He's my dad's older brother, and I've always felt closer to him and his family. Growing up, I spent a lot of time at their place since my parents often dropped me off there. My uncle and aunt never hesitated to take care of me, and I practically grew up with them. My uncle, a surgeon, and my aunt, also a doctor, were in a position to help without worry. Their son, my cousin, had already graduated, so they were happy to support me. I even offered to pay them back someday, but they insisted there was no need, saying I was like a daughter to them. When it came time to choose who to invite to my graduation, I didn't hesitate. We were allowed 4 tickets, so I bought 3 for my uncle, aunt, and cousin. I could have invited my parents, but I didn't feel close to them, and I didn't think they'd be interested. I was wrong. A few days ago, my parents asked who I planned to invite, and when I told them, they were shocked. It surprised me because they hindi taidinay. I'd barely kept in touch since I started college. Even when I went home, we hardly spoke, and they mostly kept to themselves. I spent more time at my uncle's house than at theirs. It always struck me as odd that my parents claimed they couldn't afford to send me to college, but had no issue spending money on themselves and their friends. They lived well, dining at expensive restaurants and taking trips, but I never felt like a priority. When I told them I'd already invited my uncle's family, my dad demanded tickets for themselves too. He had apparently been bragging about me to his friends and didn't want to look bad by not attending. That's when the argument began. I explained we were only allowed 4 tickets, and I'd already used 3, so I couldn't invite them. They were furious, accusing me of being ungrateful after all they had done for me. They even said, "We invested so much time and money in you, and this is how you repay us." I found that deeply offensive. They'd only ever done the bare minimum, and even that seemed more about showing off than genuine care. They didn't see me as worth the investment, so I don't see why they should expect anything from me now. I was the only one in my family who attended public school because they thought it was a waste of money to send me to a private one. I'm not complaining about the time I spent at public school. I made friends and had fun, but it was clear my parents just wanted to save money. Even when I was young, they had the means, but always made me feel like I wasn't worth spending on. Whenever I asked for something, they'd complain about how much they'd already done for me, making me feel guilty for wanting more. So, I stopped asking, even for basic things like new clothes. I had to wait until they noticed I'd outgrown my old ones before they'd take me shopping. And I'm sure they only did that to avoid looking bad to others. Even my first phone wasn't from them. It was a gift from my aunt. My whole life, I was living at their mercy, hidden away from their circle of friends. They didn't want me embarrassing them or ruining their image. They never put effort into building a relationship with me, yet they expected me to invite them to my graduation, just because they'd bragged about me to their friends. We argued on the phone, and I told them I wasn't inviting them. I reminded them of what they'd said when I turned 18, that I was an adult and needed to take care of myself. I turned it around on them, saying I was now an adult and free to make my own choices, including who I considered family. My uncle and aunt had been there for me all along, so they were my family now. I didn't want anything to do with my parents anymore. After that, I hung up and blocked their numbers. I'd only kept in touch out of courtesy, but now, after everything, I felt no need to speak to them anymore. I was furious, and I talked it over with my uncle. He reassured me that I hadn't done anything wrong, which made me feel validated in my decision. I didn't look back. But yesterday, I got an email from my dad. He said the reason they never spent much on me was that they wanted me to grow up humble and not spoiled. They thought we had a good relationship and wanted me to be independent. Now, they realized they'd lost me to my uncle and wanted another chance to make things right. They asked me to unblock them and send tickets to the graduation so they could try to fix our relationship. They told me they wouldn't post anything or even mention it to anyone, but they just needed a chance to make things right. They're practically begging me to let them come to the ceremony. They also pointed out that I invited my cousin, but not them, calling it unfair and insulting. They suggested I buy an extra ticket and invite them instead. But honestly, I don't want to do that. My cousin and I are really close, and I just don't feel right about inviting my parents. I keep rereading their email, and even though I know they're just saying things to make me feel guilty, I still feel bad. Their tone was sad, and that's what's getting to me. I'm just trying to make sure I'm doing the right thing. So, am I the asshole for inviting my uncle's family to my graduation instead of my parents? Edit. Some of you asked why my parents bragged about me to their friends. I'm graduating from one of the top business schools in the state, so I guess that's why they did. Also, people were curious why I stayed with my parents and kept in touch for so long. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. I know my uncle would have taken me in if I'd asked, but I wasn't comfortable doing that earlier. When I approached him about college, I initially just wanted him to co-sign a student loan. But he offered to cover all my tuition and expenses instead. I'm incredibly grateful for that. As for staying in touch with my parents, I did it out of a sense of obligation. I was so used to being ignored by them that it felt normal. But after reading your comments, I realize I should have cut ties when I left for college. I did have some emotional attachment to them, like most kids do, and I can't blame myself for that. I hope this clears things up for those who had questions. Update. I'm keeping my parents blocked. Most of you said I wasn't the asshole and didn't need to forgive them because they weren't really sorry. I agree because, after rereading their email, I realized they never actually apologized. They just tried to justify their actions, and it felt insincere. The email seemed fake, and even though they promised not to post anything, I don't trust them. I'm pretty sure they just wanted to impress their friends by being at my graduation. But that's not happening. They can forget about it. It's been almost a week since I blocked them, and the ceremony is in 3 days. This afternoon, my uncle and aunt surprised me by flying in 2 days early. They were supposed to arrive on the day of the ceremony, but they came early to spend more time with me. My cousin will still be arriving on the day of the ceremony since he got caught up with some last-minute work. With my uncle and aunt arriving earlier, I finally had the chance to talk to them face-to-face about what's been going on with my parents. When I explained that my parents only wanted to attend my graduation because they'd bragged about me to their friends, my uncle wasn't surprised. He told me this was typical of my dad, who's always been obsessed with his image. Even as a kid, my dad hung out with the rich and popular, trying to fit in, even though our family wasn't wealthy. This need to be seen a certain way carried into adulthood, and he married my mother, who had the same obsession. Together, they surrounded themselves with the shallowest people. My uncle also mentioned that many of my dad's friends weren't good people. They were involved in affairs or shady business dealings, but pretended everything was perfect. My uncle thought it was ridiculous that my dad still cared so much about what these people thought, even at the cost of his relationship with me. Talking to my uncle made me feel a lot better about my decision. Any guilt I felt disappeared. My parents were being fake, and I don't need to feel bad about not inviting them. I'll be spending the next 2 days with my uncle and aunt. I just hope my parents don't try anything on graduation day. It would be embarrassing, but honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they did. Update 2. I graduated today, and it was a fantastic day, except for one small incident afterward. The ceremony went smoothly, and I couldn't have been happier. But when we left to grab lunch, I started getting notifications from a bunch of relatives, and so did my uncle, aunt, and cousin. Apparently, my parents took to social media to rant about how I was treating them. They claimed my uncle's family had stolen me by brainwashing me against them. Some family members saw the post and sent us screenshots, asking what was going on. Since I had my parents blocked, I didn't see the post, but the rest of them did, and we were all pretty upset. My parents claimed I'd been having issues with them because they wanted me to be independent, but I was acting entitled. They blamed my uncle and aunt for influencing me. They insisted they raised me to be humble and independent, which is why they refused to help with college expenses. Instead of dealing with it positively, they said I ran to my uncle and aunt to complain. They claimed my uncle and aunt not only paid for my tuition, but also turned me against my parents so they could have me to themselves. That, they said, was why they weren't invited to my graduation, and they were posting about it because they were so disappointed. My parents believed my uncle and aunt were jealous, and had tried to turn me against them out of spite. They thought this was because my aunt had miscarried a few years after my cousin was born, and since I was conceived shortly after, they assumed my aunt saw me as the baby she lost. I couldn't believe they would say something so cruel. While most of the post was nonsense, that part was true. My aunt did have a miscarriage a few months before I was born. Although it was too early to know if it was a girl, my aunt always felt it would have been. When I was born, my uncle and aunt were thrilled and treated me like the daughter they never had. What was a beautiful, loving bond, my parents twisted into something ugly. It's hard to imagine anyone else could stoop so low. For them to make this public and try to make my uncle and aunt look like they were crazy was infuriating. I almost unblocked them to call them out. But my uncle stopped me. He said it wasn't worth my reaction and promised to handle it himself. He told me to keep them blocked, as they'd just keep trying to get under my skin. Everyone in the family knew what kind of person my father was, so no one took the post seriously. People were sending it to us because they didn't believe a word of it and thought we should know. So, we ignored the post, grabbed lunch, and enjoyed the rest of the day. I'm sure my parents were mad that we didn't even react, but I don't care. Nothing they did could ruin my day. My uncle and aunt are handling the situation because most of the accusations were against them. I plan to ignore my parents from now on, likely for the rest of my life. Update 3. It's been a couple of weeks since I graduated, and I've been busy applying for jobs and going to interviews. I haven't had time to think about my parents. Since college is over, I've moved in with my uncle, as I obviously can't go back to my parents' house. My uncle had a discussion with my father and got the post taken down. He threatened to take legal action and file a defamation lawsuit, which scared my dad enough to remove it. My uncle never intended to follow through, but wanted to make sure the post was gone. You'd think that would be the end of it, but a few days ago, my parents tried to reach out again. Somehow, they found out I'm living with my uncle and haven't returned to them since graduating. I've blocked them everywhere, so they had to go out of their way to contact me. They created a new email account and reached out, saying they wanted to talk. That was 4 days ago, and I didn't respond because I had no intention of speaking to them. Unfortunately, I forgot to block them, so when they sent another email 2 days later, I couldn't resist reading it. In their follow-up email, they expressed disappointment in how I was acting and claimed my uncle didn't have my best interests at heart. They accused him and my aunt of manipulating me, saying they were sick in the head. I was already tired of their nonsense, but what they said next was beyond disgusting. They claimed my uncle's threat of legal action over the post meant he was hiding something. Then they went on to say that God caused my aunt's miscarriage because they weren't fit to be parents to a girl, urging me to come back home before it was too late. I couldn't stay silent after that. I wrote back, telling them that if anyone was sick in the head, it was them. I let them know I was living a much better life with my uncle and aunt than I ever would with them, and I never wanted to speak to them again. I also warned them that if they contacted me again, I'd take legal action and file for a restraining order. After sending that, I blocked their email. I haven't mentioned any of this to my uncle or aunt, because I know how hurtful it would be for them to hear what my parents said. But I needed to get it off my chest, so I'm sharing it here. I don't plan to tell them about the email. It was too nasty and painful. What matters is that I'm here for them, and they're always there for me. My parents can believe whatever they want, but it won't change the truth. I won't let their words affect me anymore. Update 4. It's been a couple of months since I found a job and started working. I've moved out of my uncle's apartment, but I'm still close by, so I can visit whenever I want. I haven't had any contact with my parents since my last update, and I'm thankful for that. From what I hear, they're still trying to impress the same crowd. Good luck to them. They're going to need it with the way they're burning through their money. One thing's certain, if they end up broke, I won't be helping them out. As for me, things are going great. I'm settling into living on my own, and honestly, it's been pretty fun.